So, I guess my question to you would be, should I be, should Poland offer those pathways to grandchildren of people who were expelled from Poland in 1939? And if you answer yes, then I
No,
think obviously the answer to the question, no.
I would
They took all his
no.
property. They destroyed his home. They killed his entire family. You don't think that state owes
Dude,
me
I'll be honest.
citizenship?
I'm getting a little personal here, right? I don't think Poland would. Yeah, they'll play the PR game and take like a few thousand Jews, but I don't think they would take all
I
of
mean,
them.
I don't really think any of this is relevant. I think we're talking about what states should do. If states want to be ethical states, if states want to make up for the crimes they've committed in the past, if states want to do the ethical thing, what is the ethical thing to do? That is what we're
Disband.
talking about
As a
here.
libertarian, I would say disband and stop being a state.
Right, but that's not gonna solve the problem, is it? I mean, that's a nice libertarian ideological answer. But we have two opposing movements, both of which who want a state. I guess the Palestinian movement wants a Palestinian Muslim state, and the Zionist movement wants a Zionist Jewish state. That's your vision.
My vision is simple. No one has to move. Stop moving. Stop the statist idea of like how we're supposed to. These guys move here and these guys. Enough moving. In their decision, but they don't have to do it. The Jews are very happy to have moved on in the U.S. and France and Israel. You've moved on.
I think
they shouldn't be forced to do it.
I think a government that carries out a genocide against the people and the survivors of that genocide make their way to other countries. The kids and grandkids of those survivors, and if I was running that country, I would say, Ahlan wa sahlan, bruchim habaim. I'm sorry for the crimes committed by my mom and my dad. You are very welcome to come back and reclaim the citizenship that we stole from you. And by we, it's like not like 10 generations, 20, 100 generations. We're talking about 1 or 2 generations ago where people are still alive.
Annexes like it had before already done. Annexes that city, gives everyone citizenship, gives them water rights, gives them protection, gives them a real army, just like you're talking about, gives them access to the Jordanian economy like they had until 19...
Sorry. Jordan annexes them and gives them a military?
The Jordanian military protects them, right? It argues on their behalf, but they have teeth now because they're represented by...
Who supports this aside from you? Does the Jordan government want to annex Ramallah and Tulkarm? Do the Palestinians living in Tulkarm and Ramallah want to be annexed to Jordan?
In 1949, Jordan was established. Transjordan became Jordan, okay? And one of the things they did is they cleansed Jerusalem of all the Jews, like literally just sent them packing, destroyed all their synagogues, right? Okay. So Jordan, okay, I'm not even going to argue that Jews should have a right of return to their holiest sites, which I think they should, right? And you should think they should by your own morality. So, but Jordan didn't do that and didn't give them anything. But I'm saying at least it was stable and it gave everyone citizenship. The PLO comes along and says we want to be the sole representatives of the Palestinian people, right? And so that is why they're stateless. That's why there's a civil war in Jordan and there's a civil war in Lebanon. They're kicked out of Kuwait. What do they all have in common? The civilians, rather than being given citizenship in a real state like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Kuwait, the international community has this wet dream, an anti-democratic dream. They don't allow elections, nothing, to create a state for them out of a formerly terrorist organization, whether it's Hamas or PLO. So my point is, you're right. It's not a real state. And I think we should go back to having Jordan re-annex and re-give citizenship to Arabs in the West Bank and have Israel re-annex and give citizenship to the settlements in West Bank. And then Jordan and Israel can make a peace agreement, which they have. Egypt already has a peace agreement with Israel. Jordan has a peace agreement. Real stable states have peace agreements. I don't think that militant organizations like Hamas are real states. So that's the distinction I would make. I'm sorry I went on. Composed of the king. We don't care what Israel's government wants. Why should we care what Jordan's government wants? That's states. I don't care.
Hold on. But you just said okay, hold on.
Yeah.
I mean, unless we're saying, what you think will solve your argument is that this will solve for the violence, that Palestinians in Ramallah and Tulkarm are now citizens of the state of Jordan.
Yeah, they were.
That was saying,
okay, so Hamas takes over both. So now Palestine is ruled by Hamas. So now you're saying that the Israeli government, let's call it Naftali Bennett's government, is going to be negotiating with Hamas and hoping that they'll moderate? Like, what is realistic?
And Hamas doesn't want to do that, and that's partly why I'm a critic of Hamas, because Hamas is extremely maximalist. It has, violent resistance as its, core fundamental belief, and the removal in entirety of Israel is its long-term goal. And I think that is completely unrealistic. I don't think it's working for Hamas. I don't think it's working for Palestinians. And that's some of the basis of my criticism of Hamas and my argument for Palestinians to adopt a different strategy.
Is there is one state between the river and the sea right now.
Which state is that? I see two states.
The state of Israel.
What about the state of Palestine? It's recognized by 137 countries.
Does it have control over its borders? Does it have control over its airspace? Does it have control over its groundwater? Does it have control over its population registry?
No.
Does it have control over its airspace?
Neither does Luxembourg, Monaco, or any other states demilitarized. But that doesn't mean
so your argument right now is there already are two states between the river and the sea? That's your argument?
No, you're saying there's one, and I'm saying there's two. But I'm going to say, you want to know my opinion? I'll tell you my opinion right after your opinion.
But hold on. I'm just correcting.
Of course there are two states.
Of course there are two states already.
I mean, here's
no serious person believes that.
State of Palestine. I mean, how many countries recognize?
So let's talk about what a state is. Okay,
138 nations.
According to hold on. I know you're gonna find a Wikipedia page that says there's a state of Palestine. So according to I think every single serious
again, look. Obviously, I could pull up, Wikipedia saying there's a state of Palestine. I could say that the United Nations recognizes it as an observer state. But you're right, Zach.
But it's obviously not a state, right? I mean,
I agree with you.
Okay, let me ask you this: who's the defense minister of the state of Palestine? Show me the Palestinian army. Right,
Dude,
like what are the?
I mean, on the other hand, Hamas would say probably Mohammed Deif is their defense minister. So Hamas's position is that they are very much a state and they very much have control. So this is a complex issue where many people.
Honestly, I've never had to argue. I've never had to make this argument before, so this is really the first time I'm making this argument. But let's go with it.
Okay, so
a state is what makes a state a state? It has control over its borders. It has monopoly. It has a monopoly over the use of violence within its territory. Okay, so does Hamas have a monopoly over the use of violence in Gaza? Well, obviously not. Does the Palestinian Authority have a monopoly on the use of violence within the West Bank? I mean, obviously not. No, there's zero serious people in the world, maybe except for the two of you. But aside from you two, I literally don't know a single other person that thinks Palestine is a state. Okay, let me ask you this.
Let me just jump in. I do sort of agree with you that there is currently a one-state solution. Sort of by accident. But at the same time, I would push back a little bit on the idea that a state has to have a monopoly on violence within its borders, because there are countries that are very successful countries like Germany and Japan, which were conquered by the United States and where there are still American military bases. So I would say there's a little bit of fuzziness there and maybe room for maneuver, because Israel has conquered the West Bank and they're about to reconquer Gaza, and the question becomes, where do we go from there? We accepting the fact that Israel has conquered it, and also accepting the fact that Palestinians are a legitimate people. Palestinians should have a state. Palestinians should have self-determination. So that's sort of how I would look at it.
I'm going to zoom out and tell you, first of all, what I think the problem is, and then I'll tell you my solution. And I would love to hear. Okay. The problem isn't what people zoom in and say, okay, it's Jews and Arabs in this little region. Okay. And Zach, I appreciate that you are a historian of Palestine, and the same Finkelstein has the same issue where he doesn't know about the Houthis, he doesn't know about Yemen, he just knows about this. If you zoom out,
I devoted the whole of my adult life to studying the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I'm not particularly proud about that fact, incidentally. I wish my intellectual range were much broader, but
what you will find is that there was a Cold War. Okay, there was a lot of foreign meddling, and I write about this on my the League of Nations was literally the UN at the time. If you care about international law, it gave Britain a mandate to rule there, okay, and to create whatever they create. Guess what? The USSR did that too. The Ottomans did that too. The US did that too. Like,
And do you know
China
the
did
class
that.
of mandates, that Palestine was classified into, if you want to really talk about League of Nations mandates, mostly countries in Africa and Asia who were not afforded the right to a state because, you know, they of this racist view that they were basically, you know, backwards and, you know, underdeveloped and couldn't manage their own affairs of statehood. So they needed help. They needed Europe's help in figuring out how to establish statehood, right? But then, that let's just understand what the League of Nations was. It was a deeply racist organization. You know,
And the Arab League is not a deeply racist organization. I mean, which organization?
Okay.
Some sort of compromise where both sets of people can have, you know, freedom and dignity and peace. And I understand that there are legitimate grievances, but legitimate grievances don't necessarily always have to be rolled back 100% for people to coexist. I think we need to focus on, you know, taking pragmatic steps to establish a better reality on the ground.
But John, why are you talking about two states? What about the crisis in Yemen? What about the crisis in
No, but
Eritrea? What about the crisis in North Korea? Wait, hold on, guys. We haven't talked about Sudan yet. Hold on, hey, guys. Wait, hold on. Wait. We got to talk about the crisis in North Sinai.
But Zach,
wait, hold on. No, we have to talk about Brazilian rainforest deforestation.
Zach,
I mean, John, Greg, that's literally. It's. Just,
I'm sorry, but you're navel.
I don't even know how to have a conversation with you.
When you're navel gazing at a small conflict with tens of thousands of people, okay, and literally 25 million people in Sudan do need humanitarian aid. And by the way, that's not even the largest conflict because in Yemen, for years,
you're proving my point right now.
You can't. First of all, Jews lived throughout the Middle East, and over the last 1600 years, of course, Arabs. There were times when they were massacred. The Jews were massacred and expelled, and so on. Of course. So to say, of course, that them in the Middle East having no problems with Arabs, certainly not the case.
No one's disputing that. But you said there was a conflict. I just want to make sure I understand your point now. There's a conflict between Jews and Arabs in Palestine before Zionism.
Ottomans were ruling at the time. Okay. So the whole idea of Zionism wasn't to displace anyone because the Ottoman Empire was literally there. So they weren't trying to destroy the Ottoman Empire. They were trying to move into the Ottoman Empire.
I mean, in fact, you're actually wrong about that. Herzl tried to buy Palestine from Sultan Abdulhamid II.
Buy, but not
correct.
Destroy.
Well, take over. I mean, take control over. Have it be an independent Jewish state.
Let me put it this way. That same Hamid literally killed hundreds of thousands of Christians.
Wait, you love talking about things that you love just completely switching the topics. We're not
I'm putting it. Sorry, I just want to say, compared to that, obviously Jews lived very nicely with Arabs. Like they lived very nicely with Ottomans because they weren't massacred in killing fields. So what is your standard of living nice? Yes, according to this, they weren't massacred by Ottomans. That was great. Ottoman Empire. But guess what? Under the British Mandate, it was much better. The British didn't massacre anyone, right?
The British didn't massacre anybody.
My uncles my great uncles were actually killed by the British. By the way, my great uncles were part of the Al-Qassam's group in the West Bank in the 1930s, and they were actually killed by the British for what it's worth.
But just to be fair, I don't mean to be insensitive, but the Black Hand, if you're talking about Al-Qassam, right? Wasn't that a terrorist organization?
Absolutely. Well, I'm not defending them. I'm not defending them. But
the British were the colonizers, and the Qassams were the revolutionaries trying to free their country from colonial rule.
Okay, so now we get
just to be clear, I don't support the Black Hand, right? But
just to be clear, there were no British soldiers in Palestine in 1910. Use the word terrorism to describe the people who were against that, who were against violent imposition of a colonial state against the will of 85% of the indigenous population. I just want to be careful when we use the word terrorism to describe people rejecting that.
Do you understand, though, that every place on earth, the Ottomans ruled it before the British, and why don't you call them?
So you're anti-democracy is your argument now. Okay, I mean, okay.
Wait, when did I think democracy?
Because I'm pro-democracy. What I'm saying is, here's what I'm taking issue with.
I'm anti-violent democracy.
You just described.
Wait, are you saying that being against an empire like the rebels, like Luke Skywalker, right? That's being democratic. That's what you're saying.
Your argument is that if you're pro-democracy and you use and you're willing to use force against the people who are against democracy, that you're a terrorist.
Go ahead.
That's your argument. Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
I mean, I certainly would have questions about calling them pro-democracy, not least because I think that their ideology was Islamist, and how democracy really slots into kind of the Islamist rubric is quite a controversial controversial topic, really. But I would. But my only point that the British did, they certainly did kill a fair chunk of Palestinians. And
well, okay, but
British...
if your example is, and I'm sorry that it's a personal example, but at the end of the day, if you're saying that they were in the Black Hand, I mean, it was only several hundred men, and you're right, it justified violence on religious grounds, and so the British would view them as agitators and try to quell that. Look, I agree with that, but again, how do you compare that with killing hundreds of thousands of Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, like that the Ottomans did? It's just not even.
Well, but those are all horrible. Those are all horrible atrocities. I don't think either John or myself would ever defend any of those
absolutely
things.
not. We never
right.
would.
I mean, and the scale is.
That doesn't change the fact that the British regime in Palestine was anti-democratic. You're just you're sort of like, but what about? But there were these other regimes that were also really bad. But that just doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about.
This is where I have
the British regime in Palestine was fundamentally anti-democratic, and I think this is something Zionists tend to forget, which is to say that the entire Zionist project was facilitated through anti-democratic violence. Is the British came into Palestine and said, "Guess what, native Arabs? We don't really care what kind of government you want. We're going to impose a government that we want on you." That's what colonialism is. Colonialism says, we decide because we have the guns.
Dude.
And we don't care what you think because you don't have the guns. That's colonialism. And that's why it has a bad rap today, because today we believe that the legitimacy of a regime should be a function of how democratic it is, whether it embraces separation of powers and division and independent judiciary and free press and civil and allows civil society organizations to flourish. That is what we consider to be a legitimate government, and none of those things were allowed under the British rule. And that was the government that allowed Zionists to migrate to Palestine, which is, I think, fundamentally why so many Palestinians see the entire enterprise as illegitimate, because it was anti-democratic and it was only made possible through colonial violence.
2 points, and then yeah, go ahead. Before I just wanted to
go on
2 points, and then John, please. I'm sorry this devolved into. So look, 2 things. One, the current Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is anti-democratic. It even says on Wikipedia it's an authoritarian regime that has not held elections in 15 years, criticized for human rights abuses, cracking down journalists, whatever.
100%.
And this is a wet dream of the globalists.
90% of Palestinians are calling on Mahmoud Abbas to resign.
Okay, so to be fair, if they had an election today, they would elect another anti-democratic group, which is in 2006. They never had another election there either in Gaza. So
Hamas is also anti-democratic.
Okay, so and that brings me to my second point, which is that anti-Zionists seem to think that like this is everyone's born yesterday and it's the only conflict on earth, and like, wow, the British weren't the best, but it's whataboutism to bring up much larger massacres. To me, that is obscene to say, well, hundreds of thousands of people killed are just a distraction from this navel gazing here about 100 people. My point is this, is that you could certainly pick a country, let's call it Israel, and try to say, as some of the people in the UN said, when they gained access to the UNESCO or the women's rights, they said Israel's the worst violator of women's rights in the world. Israel is the worst, violator of art pieces in the world. And it's like, well,
who says Israel's the number one? Where are you even getting this stuff from?
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that, to be fair.
There are a lot of things Israel is accused of. Being the world's worst country on women's rights. I actually don't think I've ever heard that one before.
Okay, so unfortunately, this is how farcical it is. This is how farcical it is. When I showed this to Norman Finkelstein, he literally said, I think it's okay to quote him on this. I don't want to show the email. He literally said, man, those guys are such losers, referring to the Palestinian Authority. These guys gained access to the UN as an observer state. And what they did is they tried to get as many parts of the UN to condemn Israel for these things. And one of them was women's rights. Literally,
Well, look, I mean, let's not waste time because this is a stupid conversation. Let's move on. I mean, I can go for
the
about
League
10
of
minutes, guys,
Nations
okay?
was literally the UN at the time. If you care about international law, it gave Britain a mandate to rule there, okay, and to create whatever they create. Guess what? The USSR did that too. The Ottomans did that too. The US did that too. Like,
And do you know
China
the class of mandates? The class of mandates that Palestine was classified into, if you want to really talk about League of Nations mandates. So there were a few different classes of mandates. And I mean, look, first of all, the League of Nations was a deeply racist organization, right? I mean, let's just set the stage here. If we really want to talk about, yes, I mean, in theory, the League of Nations mandates is part of the corpus of international law, but let's not fool ourselves into thinking this was somehow a democratic organization that believed all peoples of the world are equal to the same rights. That's just fiction.
That was international law. Which other organization represented
Well,
international law?
law has come a long way since the 1920s, right?
The
You would
UN
agree
took
on
over.
that.
Everything the League of Nations said, the UN took over. And
Well, all I'm saying is that the League of Nations classified countries into different categories of countries based on their levels of development. And the countries that had the highest levels of development, those in Eastern Europe, were said that they should be granted independence after World War I. Whereas there were other and by the way, I believe Palestine was actually included in that category of countries. Whereas there were more, let's say, underdeveloped countries, mostly countries in Africa and Asia, who were not afforded the right to a state because of this racist view that they were basically, backwards and, underdeveloped and couldn't manage their own affairs of statehood. So they needed help. They needed Europe's help in figuring out how to establish statehood, right? But then, so that let's just understand what the League of Nations was. It was a deeply racist organization.
and the Arab League is not a deeply racist organization. I mean, which organizations?
But okay.